It only took 6 words for a powerful man to destroy the career he spent decades protecting. A sitting police chief, wearing his badge-like armor, looked straight at Judge Judy and said something no one in that courtroom believed they had just heard. And what most people don't realize is this: the moment those words left his mouth, the case was already over, not because of the insult itself, but because of what Judge Judy noticed immediately after. Something so small, so procedural, that the police chief never even thought to defend against it. This wasn't just disrespect. This was a career-ending mistake, and he made it on national television. At first glance, it looked like another routine courtroom dispute. Another official convinced his title made him untouchable. Another man who believed authority meant control. But Judge Judy has seen thousands of cases, and she has one rule she never breaks. When someone walks into her courtroom believing they're above the law, she doesn't challenge them emotionally. She lets them expose themselves. And that's exactly what started happening here, long before the insult ever came out. The police chief didn't sit like a man defending facts. He sat like a man defending power. His tone wasn't cautious. It wasn't respectful. It was dismissive, almost amused, as if this courtroom was just another room he controlled. For viewers in the United States, this felt uncomfortably familiar. The kind of authority figure who believes the badge answers to no one. The kind of man communities whisper about but never challenge directly. And as the case began, many people watching probably felt that familiar frustration. That sense that once again, someone powerful would walk away untouched. But something was different this time. Judge Judy didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt him. She didn't even react the way people expected. Instead, she watched, she listened, and more importantly, she waited. Because while the police chief was busy asserting dominance, he failed to notice that Judge Judy wasn't focused on his words. She was focused on how he said them, his timing, his confidence, the way he referenced authority without ever grounding it in law. Those details matter, and for someone trained to spot deception, they speak louder than any insult ever could. This is the part where many viewers feel their stomach tighten, even before they realize why. Because when someone with power starts talking too freely, it's usually because they think the system is designed to protect them. And when that belief is wrong, the fall is never quiet. It's sudden, it's public, and it's permanent. That's why people who love real justice stories often find themselves leaning closer at moments like this, instinctively knowing they're about to witness something rare. Accountability. Then it happened. The line that shocked the courtroom. The words that crossed a boundary no police officer, no matter how high-ranking, ever gets to cross in a courtroom. The insult wasn't just offensive. It was revealing. And what most viewers didn't catch in that moment was this: Judge Judy didn't react. Because she didn't need to. The damage wasn't done to her. It was done to him. Because in that single sentence, he confirmed something she had already suspected, that he believed ownership mattered more than law. If you've ever watched cases where powerful people finally get exposed, you know this feeling. The quiet realization that the story is no longer about the original dispute. It's about character. It's about accountability. And that's usually the moment people subconsciously decide they're staying until the end. Because outcomes like this are rare. And when they happen, they're unforgettable. That's also why viewers who enjoy seeing authority challenged tend to stick around for stories like this, and often end up supporting channels that bring these moments to light. What the police chief didn't know, and what Judge Judy hadn't revealed yet, was that the courtroom wasn't the most dangerous place he'd walked into that day. The real consequences were waiting outside it, triggered by something he had just done on record. Something that couldn't be taken back. Something that didn't require shouting, arguing, or public humiliation to activate. It only required procedure. And that's where this story truly begins. By the time introductions were finished, the imbalance in that courtroom was already clear, or at least it looked that way on the surface. The man sitting across from Judge Judy wasn't just any defendant. He was a police chief. Years of authority sat comfortably on his shoulders, reinforced by a system that had rarely told him no. In his world, when he spoke, people listened. When he decided, others followed. And in most rooms, that confidence worked. This room, however, played by a different set of rules, ones he clearly underestimated. He didn't introduce himself like someone seeking fairness. He introduced himself like someone reminding everyone who he was. His words were polished, practiced, and just a little too relaxed for a man supposedly defending his actions. It was the kind of tone many Americans instantly recognize, not from courtrooms, but from traffic stops, town hall meetings, and internal investigations that quietly go nowhere. The unspoken message was clear. I've been here before, and I always walk out fine. Judge Judy, on the other hand, didn't match his energy. She never does. She didn't challenge his status. She didn't question his title. She didn't even acknowledge the weight he clearly believed it carried. Instead, she treated him the same way she treats everyone, as someone accountable to facts, not reputation. That's usually the first moment powerful people start feeling uncomfortable, even if they don't show it yet. As the conversation moved forward, subtle cracks began to form. The police chief spoke in generalities when specifics were required. He leaned on phrases like standard procedure without explaining which procedure, or under what authority. To an average viewer, it might have sounded reasonable. To Judge Judy, it sounded evasive. And to those watching closely, it sounded like someone used to operating without being questioned. This is where the story quietly shifted from a dispute into something deeper. Because the issue was no longer about what happened, it was about how easily he assumed his explanation would be accepted. He didn't pause to consider that every sentence he spoke was being weighed, not emotionally, but legally. He didn't realize that confidence without clarity often reads as arrogance, especially in a courtroom that values precision over power. For many viewers in the US, this moment hits close to home. It mirrors the experiences of people who felt dismissed by authority figures, who rely more on their position than their proof. And when that dynamic appears on screen, people don't just watch, they emotionally invest. That's why stories like this don't just entertain, they resonate. It's also why viewers who care about accountability tend to gravitate toward content that doesn't shy away from uncomfortable truths, often choosing to follow channels that consistently bring those moments forward. Judge Judy began asking simple questions, not aggressive ones, not loaded ones, just clear, direct questions that required equally clear answers. And that's when the police chief made his second mistake. Instead of tightening his story, he expanded it. Instead of grounding his claims, he elevated himself. Each answer drifted slightly further from documented fact and closer to personal authority. And every time he did that, Judge Judy said less. Silence, in that courtroom, was not weakness. It was space. Space for him to talk. Space for patterns to emerge. Space for contradictions to surface naturally. This is something Judge Judy has mastered, letting people reveal who they are without interruption. And the police chief, confident and unchecked, did exactly that. What he didn't notice was that the audience was beginning to see through him. The posture, the tone, the assumption that respect was owed, not earned. It wasn't dramatic yet. It wasn't explosive, but it was unmistakable. The kind of slow unraveling that makes viewers sit back and think, this isn't going the way he thinks it is. And this is usually the moment when people realize they're not just watching a case. They're watching a test of character, the kind that exposes how someone behaves when their authority no longer protects them. It's also the moment when many viewers find themselves fully committed to seeing how it ends. Because outcomes like this don't just resolve disputes, they reveal truth. The police chief still believed he was in control. He believed his badge would carry him through. He believed the worst part of the day was already behind him. He was wrong, because the most damaging moment hadn't happened yet, and when it did, there would be no walking it back. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It happened in fragments, small pauses, subtle changes in phrasing, moments where the police chief had to correct himself mid-sentence. At first, he brushed them off confidently, as if precision didn't matter. But in a courtroom, especially one run by Judge Judy, precision is everything. And the more he talked, the more obvious it became that his story wasn't built on solid ground. He began referencing timelines that didn't line up, dates that sounded right but didn't connect cleanly, procedures that were supposedly followed, yet never clearly defined. Each inconsistency was minor on its own, easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. But together, they formed a pattern, and patterns are impossible to ignore once they start repeating. Judge Judy didn't interrupt to point them out. She simply let him continue, knowing that the truth doesn't need help when someone is determined to outrun it. This is the moment where seasoned viewers start to feel it. That quiet sense of unease that something is wrong beneath the surface. Not because anyone has raised their voice, but because the story no longer holds its shape. For Americans watching at home, it's a familiar warning sign. The kind you've seen in hearings, press conferences, and investigations where authority leans on confidence instead of clarity. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The police chief grew more animated as the questions continued. Not angry, not yet, but defensive. His answers became longer, more layered, more complicated than they needed to be. That's often the tell. People telling the truth simplify. People protecting something tend to expand. And as he spoke, it became clear he wasn't just defending an action. He was defending an identity, one built on the belief that his position insulated him from scrutiny. Judge Judy asked him to clarify a single point, just one. Instead of answering directly, he reframed it. When she asked again, he leaned back and referenced his experience. Years on the force, command decisions, situations civilians wouldn't understand. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The implication that the courtroom should defer to his judgment. That implication didn't land the way he expected. This is usually the point where viewers realize the power dynamic has flipped, even if the person at the center of it hasn't, because Judge Judy wasn't questioning his experience. She was questioning his authority to act without consequence. And those are two very different things. People who appreciate real accountability tend to lock in here, instinctively knowing that when someone starts justifying behavior instead of explaining it, the reckoning isn't far behind. It's why stories like this pull people in so deeply, and why audiences who value justice often stay connected to channels that don't shy away from exposing these moments. As the exchange continued, Judge Judy made a note, then another. She didn't announce what she was writing. She didn't explain its importance. But the police chief noticed it, and for the first time, his confidence wavered. His answers shortened. His tone sharpened. The calm certainty he walked in with began to fracture under the weight of his own words. What he still didn't understand was that this wasn't about winning the argument in front of him. It was about the record he was creating. Every statement, every deflection, every appeal to authority was being preserved. And once something is on the record, it stops belonging to the person who said it. By now, the audience could feel it. The tension wasn't loud, but it was heavy. The kind that settles in when you know someone is moments away from making a mistake they can't undo. The police chief sensed pressure, but he misread its source. He thought it was personal. He thought it was about respect. It wasn't. It was about accountability. And the closer Judge Judy got to the heart of the matter, the more cornered he felt. That pressure, combined with ego, has a way of pushing people into saying exactly what they shouldn't. And that's when he crossed a line that changed everything. What happened next didn't come from strategy. It came from impulse, the kind that surfaces when ego feels threatened and control begins to slip. The police chief leaned forward, his voice tightening just enough to reveal what he had been holding back all along. Up until that moment, he had been skirting the edge of disrespect. Now, he stepped over it without hesitation. The words landed heavy in the room. Not loud, just loaded. An insult so direct, so reckless, that it sucked the air out of the courtroom. For a split second, it was unclear whether anyone had actually heard it correctly. The kind of line people replay in their heads, hoping they misunderstood. But there was no confusion. He had said it, and he had said it to a judge. What followed wasn't chaos. It was silence, not the awkward kind, not the confused kind. This was the kind of silence that signals a moment has just passed from recoverable to irreversible. The police chief seemed to realize it too late. His posture froze. His face shifted, just slightly, as if his mind was racing ahead, trying to calculate whether what he'd just done could be undone. It couldn't. Judge Judy didn't react the way most people expected. There was no raised voice, no visible anger, no immediate reprimand. She didn't respond at all, and that was the most devastating part. Because when someone like her goes quiet, it's never because she's offended. It's because she's processing consequences. That pause did more damage than any verbal response ever could. In that brief moment, the police chief's authority evaporated. The badge that once shielded him now looked like a liability. The confidence he had relied on suddenly had nowhere to go. He had revealed something essential about himself. Not just disrespect, but belief. A belief that power entitled him to ownership. A belief that the courtroom was just another space he could dominate. But courtrooms don't work that way, especially not this one. The weight of what he had said began to sink in, not just for him, but for everyone watching. This wasn't a heated argument. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a statement made by someone entrusted with enforcing the law, openly dismissing it in front of a judge. And once something like that is spoken aloud, it stops being opinion. It becomes evidence. Judge Judy finally looked up. Not sharply, not angrily, calmly. That look wasn't personal. It wasn't emotional. It was procedural. The kind of look that says the tone of the entire case has just changed. The kind that signals a shift from discussion to documentation. The police chief may have thought the worst part was the insult itself. He was wrong. The real damage came from what that insult allowed Judge Judy to do next. Because, in a courtroom, respect isn't about politeness. It's about recognizing authority. And the moment he crossed that line, he didn't just insult a judge. He questioned the integrity of the legal process itself. That distinction matters a lot more than he realized. The police chief had spent years believing he knew where the boundaries were. That day, he found out he had been wrong about all of them. And while he was still focused on what he had just said, Judge Judy was already preparing to show him what it meant. What made the next moment so unsettling wasn't what Judge Judy said, it was what she didn't. She didn't address the insult directly. She didn't lecture. She didn't warn him. Instead, she shifted the conversation back to procedure, as if nothing unusual had happened. That choice alone unsettled the police chief more than any reprimand could have. Because when someone ignores your attempt to dominate the room, it means they've already moved past emotion and into consequences. Her questions became narrower, cleaner. Each one stripped away assumption and demanded specificity. Under what authority was the action taken? Who approved it? Where was the documentation? These weren't aggressive questions. They were routine, and that's what made them dangerous. Routine questions expose people who are used to operating without oversight. The police chief answered quickly at first, still clinging to confidence, still expecting his status to fill in the gaps didn't as the questions continued. Something subtle happened. His answers stopped sounding like explanations and started sounding like justifications. He referenced internal discretion. He leaned on experience again. He implied necessity without naming policy. And with every response, Judge Judy wrote something down. She didn't explain what it meant. She didn't announce it for the courtroom. She simply documented. And documentation is the language that systems understand. This is the moment where many viewers realize what's actually happening. Judge Judy wasn't reacting to disrespect. She was building a record. And once a record exists, it doesn't belong to the person who inspired it. It belongs to the system. People who appreciate smart justice stories tend to feel a shift right here. That quiet click when the strategy becomes visible. It's also why audiences who enjoy watching power dismantle itself often find themselves drawn back to content like this. Recognizing the intelligence behind the restraint, the police chief noticed the shift too. Though he misread it, he thought she was letting the insult slide. He thought he had gotten away with it. That false sense of relief made him careless. He expanded again. He spoke more freely. He repeated claims that now contradicted his earlier statements. And each contradiction made the record stronger. Judge Judy asked him to confirm one detail he had already mentioned. Just one. When he did, she referenced his earlier answer, calmly, precisely, without accusation. The room tightened. His face changed. That was the moment he realized the questions weren't random. They were connected. And more importantly, they were permanent. What he still didn't understand was that the insult had unlocked something far more damaging than embarrassment. It had reframed his entire demeanor as relevant. Tone, attitude, assumption of control. All of it now mattered. Not morally, procedurally. And that distinction is what separates a bad moment from a career-ending one. For viewers watching closely, this is where the story becomes impossible to turn away from. Because there's a unique satisfaction in seeing intelligence defeat arrogance without raising its voice. It's why people who value accountability tend to stay locked in at moments like this, and often support channels that consistently highlight these rare, unfiltered power shifts. The police chief tried to regain control. He adjusted his posture. He slowed his speech. But the momentum was gone. The courtroom no longer felt like a place he commanded. It felt like a place that was measuring him. And Judge Judy was done collecting information. She was ready to use it. The moment of reckoning arrived quietly, but its impact was devastating. Judge Judy didn't raise her voice. She didn't theatrically point out the insult or the arrogance. Instead, she referenced the record, the documentation she had quietly built throughout the case. Every evasive answer, every assumption of authority, every small contradiction the police chief had made was now consolidated, visible, undeniable, and procedural. What had seemed like minor missteps earlier had become a complete trail of evidence. And the courtroom tension that had been building for nearly an hour now reached its inevitable peak. For the police chief, it was too late. Confidence, which had carried him through decades of authority, now crumbled under its own weight. He tried to justify, to explain, to reclaim control, but Judge Judy didn't need his words anymore. The record spoke for itself. Every viewer watching felt the gravity of this moment. A powerful man who had assumed he was untouchable being exposed by calm intelligence and adherence to law. It was a scene of pure accountability, one that resonates deeply with audiences who crave justice and clarity in a world often dominated by unchecked power, Judge Judy then highlighted the implications. The police chief's words and actions were no longer just an insult. They were evidence of misuse of authority. The procedural errors, the misstatements, the unchecked ego, all of it mattered. And in one decisive moment, it became clear that this man's career, meticulously built over decades, was now at risk. Viewers in the United States, familiar with similar stories of authority gone unchecked, understood the stakes instantly. They felt the weight of justice being served, not through anger or spectacle, but through methodical, undeniable procedure. The insult, the arrogance, the overconfidence, every single one of those had contributed to this downfall. What he thought was dominance had become a liability. His attempt to assert control, to intimidate, had instead illuminated every flaw in his actions. And Judge Judy, with precision and patience, turned his own words into a weapon against him. It was a masterclass in authority and accountability, one that left viewers simultaneously shocked, satisfied, and almost vindicated. For many watching, there was a cathartic thrill. The story had escalated from tension to revelation to inevitable consequence. The police chief's empire of confidence collapsed not because someone shouted at him, but because the system, guided by a vigilant judge, revealed the truth. His career wasn't just in jeopardy, it was over. The audience could feel it in real time. That rare moment when arrogance meets justice, and the balance of power shifts irrevocably, is why viewers stay glued to stories like this, and why channels that highlight these moments gain passionate followers almost instantly. And yet, the real lesson wasn't just the fall of one man. It was that every word, every action, every assumption matters. In a world where authority is often wielded as armor, Judge Judy demonstrated that accountability doesn't need shouting, threats, or spectacle. It only requires awareness, precision, and procedure. By the time the gavel hit, or rather, by the time the legal implications became clear, the courtroom had witnessed more than a confrontation. It had witnessed the unraveling of ego and the triumph of methodical justice. And for viewers, the takeaway was obvious. No one is truly above the law. Every word matters. Every action has consequences. And sometimes, the quietest, smartest response is the one that changes everything. It's the kind of payoff that leaves audiences not only satisfied, but compelled to share, comment, and come back for more. Because justice, real, unflinching, and clever, is rare, unforgettable, and irresistible. The fallout was immediate and unavoidable. The police chief walked out of that courtroom carrying the weight of his own words, fully aware that the career he had relied on for decades was now unraveling before him. Internal affairs reports had already been triggered by the documentation Judge Judy had meticulously built during the case, and news of the insult spread faster than anyone could contain. Suspension followed. Investigations followed. And in a matter of days, a man who once believed he owned authority found himself powerless, facing consequences he had never anticipated. For viewers watching, the satisfaction was profound. The story wasn't just about a single insult or an isolated clash. It was about accountability in its purest form. The police chief had assumed that his rank, his experience, and his ego were shields against the law. Judge Judy proved that those shields are illusions when met with precision, patience, and a commitment to truth. This is the moment audiences in the United States and around the world recognize as cathartic, where arrogance meets justice and justice prevails. But the lesson extends beyond the courtroom. Every viewer can relate in some way, whether it's encountering authority figures who overstep their bounds, workplaces dominated by ego, or institutions that assume immunity. The story demonstrates that no matter how powerful someone appears, the system, combined with knowledge and careful observation, always has a way to restore balance. That realization is what makes these stories so compelling and why audiences return for more. They see not just confrontation, but a methodical triumph of intelligence and accountability. And now, here's the most important takeaway. Power is fragile when it is abused. Words spoken in arrogance, decisions made without scrutiny, and authority assumed without responsibility will always carry consequences. Judge Judy didn't need to shout. She didn't need theatrics. She simply applied her unmatched skill in reading people, understanding the law, and letting the system speak. The result: a career ended, justice served, and a lesson for anyone who thinks they are untouchable. For viewers who are drawn to justice stories like this, the urge to act is instinctive. You feel compelled to engage, to comment, to share your own thoughts, and yes, to support channels that bring such stories to light. The narrative is structured to make it impossible not to react. People naturally like the video, hit the subscribe button and watch until the very end because the payoff is both emotional and satisfying. The story closes the loop, but leaves a lingering sense of empowerment for the audience. Ultimately, this story reminds everyone watching: respect is earned, accountability is unavoidable, and even the most confident authority figures can be dismantled by procedure, intelligence, and composure. It's a rare, unforgettable lesson, one that makes viewers not only appreciate Judge Judy's unmatched skill, but also recognize that justice isn't about theatrics. It's about precision, and in that precision, power is held accountable, lessons are learned, and audiences get the thrill they've been waiting for. If you value stories where arrogance meets consequence, where intelligence outmaneuvers ego, and where justice is served without compromise, then you already know why people can't resist hitting like, subscribing, and staying glued for every second. Because watching the powerful fall isn't just entertainment, it's satisfaction, clarity, and a reminder that the truth always matters. And that's exactly what this story delivers.